Have you ever felt like life just isn't going your way? Like one hard thing after another keeps piling up? Well, you are not alone. Meet Ruth, a woman whose story begins with tragedy, but ends with redemption, love, and purpose. The book of Ruth is a beautiful story in the Old Testament, showing us how God is always at work, even in the hardest moments of life. As we read through this small but powerful book, let's remember it's not just a fairy tale or a romantic drama. It is part of the larger gospel narrative. From start to finish, the gospel is woven into the story of Ruth. So, who wrote the book of Ruth? Well, we don't actually know for sure. Many scholars believe it was the prophet Samuel, but the book itself doesn't actually say. What we do know is that it was written during the reign of King David, a chaotic period in Israel's history. And yet, right in the middle of all that chaos, we get this beautiful, hope-filled story. The book of Ruth is about God's faithfulness, his redemption, and his love. Ruth highlights three main characters and their journeys. Naomi, the bitter mother-in-law who turns back to God and finds healing and joy. Ruth, the widowed foreigner without a future who finds love, hope, and a destiny. And Boaz, whose love moves him to redeem and restore, securing a future filled with hope for both Naomi and Ruth. The book of Ruth is broken down into 4 small chapters. Chapter 1 is where tragedy strikes. A severe famine caused devastation in the land of Israel, and the book opens with a family of 4 leaving their home in search of food relief among the foreign gods and the people of the Moabites, a region northeast of the Dead Sea. Unfortunately, life does not become better or easier for this small family. Tragedy strikes again. Naomi's husband and both her sons die, leaving her and her 2 daughter-in-laws, Ruth and Orpah, widowed. Naomi, broken, alone, and angry, decides to return to her homeland and to her God. She urges her daughter-in-laws to go back to their families, but Ruth refuses to leave Naomi, and she says these famous words, "Where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God." So together, they travel back to Bethlehem, completely broken, alone, and without a future. In fact, Naomi says she felt as if the Lord's hand had turned against her. Have you ever felt like Naomi? Broken and without hope? If so, you'll want to keep reading this book because God's grace and goodness are waiting for Naomi and Ruth's return. Chapter 2 focuses on gleaning and grace. Upon returning to Israel, Naomi's homeland, Ruth decides to go and glean, to gather leftover grain dropped by harvesters so she can provide for herself and Naomi. By God's grace, she just so happened to end up in the field of Boaz, a kind and wealthy man who shows her favor. Naomi hears of Boaz's kindness, and she recognizes Boaz as a potential Goel, or kinsman redeemer. This is a close family member who, by Israelite law, had the responsibility to marry a widowed relative to redeem their family line and redeem their inheritance. Naomi sees God's goodness and his grace in sending Ruth to Boaz's field, and she exclaims, "The Lord has not stopped showing his kindness to us." And in that moment, God's goodness begins to heal Naomi's bitter heart. In chapter 3, we learn of the midnight proposal. Filled with fresh hope, Naomi comes up with this bold plan, and she tells Ruth to approach Boaz at night and ask him to be their family's redeemer. Ruth carries out the plan, and Boaz is honored by Ruth's request, and he agrees. And finally, in chapter 4, we read of redemption and restoration. Boaz takes care of all the details and marries Ruth. Boaz is Ruth's Goel, or her kinsman redeemer. Together they have a son named Obed, who later becomes the grandfather of King David. And from his family line, Jesus is born. Ruth's story is a beautiful picture of redemption, moving from loss to love, from emptiness to fullness, from helplessness to hope, and shows how God's plan is always at work. So, what can you and I learn from the book of Ruth? Well, one is that God is always working, even in difficult seasons. Are you in a tough season? Do you know of someone who's in a difficult spot? God is at work even when we can't see or feel him. The second thing we learn from the book of Ruth is that faithfulness matters. Ruth's loyalty changed history. Her story impacts each one of us today as she becomes the great-grandmother of King David, and from her line, Jesus comes. Faithfulness matters. And 3, Jesus is our ultimate redeemer. Just like Boaz redeemed Ruth, giving her a future and a hope, Jesus redeems us, giving us a future and a hope. So as you read the book of Ruth, remember, no matter where you are in your story, God is weaving something beautiful, just like he did for Ruth. And as you turn to him and trust in him, watch him bring redemption, healing, and restoration to your story. Jesus is your kinsman redeemer. And may you say, like Ruth, the Lord has not stopped showing kindness to me.